Welcome, everyone, to Our Power's third gubernatorial power lunch. We are privileged to be joined here today by Democratic candidate for Governor Shenna Bellows. I'll introduce her momentarily. My name is Seth Berry. I am privileged to be the executive director of Our Power. Our Power has been around since 2020, advocating for lower electricity rates, greater local control, and better reliability, among other things. You may recall that we were very involved in the CMP rate hike request being rejected by the PUC last fall, for example. So really glad you could join us. And we're going to hear from the candidate as we have in the past power lunches. And then you will have a chance to pose your questions using the Q&A function at the bottom, using the chat, or maybe even raising your hand and being briefly allowed to speak. Otherwise, we cannot see you. You are offline. Feel free to eat your lunch. Feel free to take a walk as you listen. And I'm going to turn now to our special guest. Shenna Bellows is an old friend. I got to know Shenna a little bit before this, but my earliest memory of her, deeply engraved, is when she was the executive director of the ACLU of Maine. And at that time, I was the assistant majority leader and represented a pretty conservative district, a socially conservative district. And she asked me, she came right into my office, marched right in, had the temerity to ask me to be the first member of leadership to sign as a co-sponsor, leadership co-sponsor of marriage equality. And it's my privilege to do that. But Shenna has done much more since ACLU, directing the ACLU. She went on to become a state senator and is Maine's current Secretary of State. If you are a Democrat or an unenrolled voter, you can vote for Shenna in the primary next Tuesday. And I think that's probably part of the reason you're here, because you want to know who to vote for and how to rank your votes. So here we get to hear from Shenna about her energy plans and priorities and a little bit about her. And then again, we will go to your questions after she gives some introductory remarks. So Shenna, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Seth, and thank you for leading on marriage equality back in the day when I was head of the ACLU and was on the executive committee of that campaign. It took us 7 years, but we did it. And I think that is how positive change is ever won, is grassroots organizing by the people, demanding justice, demanding better laws and a better world. And that's what Our Power has been doing as well. So it's a great pleasure to be here today. I know that some folks watching are meeting me for the first time and may not know that much about me except for my leadership as Secretary of State. I'm sure my name is on everybody's driver license or ID, if you're wondering how to spell it. So I'll just share a little bit about who I am, why I'm running, and my vision for more affordable, clean energy in our state moving forward, and a partnership with advocates like Our Power to really hold the power companies accountable and to improve service, improve affordability, and meet our climate action goals. I grew up in the town of Hancock, Maine. When I was 4 years old, my parents bought a piece of land there. My sister was 3, my brother was 2. My dad had just started his own carpentry business, Bellows Woodworks, and my mom was working nights in a light bulb filament factory called L. Scott's in Sullivan. They pitched a tent, and in their spare time, they dug out an old cellar hole, and we lived in the basement the following winter. Now, we lived up a long dirt road right of way, a private road. And so the reason we couldn't afford electricity until I was in the 5th grade was, of course, as residents on a private driveway, we were required to buy the poles to install to bring electricity to our house. And again, we couldn't afford that until when I was in the 5th grade, my mom decided I was old enough to take care of my 4th grade and 3rd grade siblings after school, and she went back to work full time during the day as a greenhouse worker. That was a big year. It was very exciting to get electricity and to get indoor plumbing. And it was really transformational for us. I remember my best friend in grammar school was they were getting rid of their old refrigerator. They were going to take it to the dump. And so instead, they gave it to us and we had a refrigerator. Uh, but I do also remember before we did that installation, my parents, who were strong environmentalists, my dad ran for select board and helped open Hancock's first recycling center. My mom ran for planning board, and back in the 80s, when bald eagles were rare and endangered, helped save a bald eagle's nest in our town. I remember going on a hunt for alternative sources of power, looking for a windmill. And my parents never could afford anything that they found. And so those just were out of reach for us. So I bring this affordability lens to my thinking about energy policy. I worked my way through high school and college. In high school, I won an internship at the Mount Desert Island Biological Laboratory. I'm actually a published author in acid-base transfer in the longhorn sculpin. But when the lab closed at 5 o'clock, I would go to one of my other jobs, waiting tables, working at Subway, or on the weekends in the kitchen of the local lobster pound. In college at Middlebury College, I studied international politics and economics, as well as biology and chemistry. I wrote my thesis on sustainability and climate change. And I was the recycling coordinator on campus, which is another word in some ways for trash collector, because when you're collecting the recycling from the dorms, you're also collecting the trash. I worked my way through high school and college, won a lot of scholarships, had a lot of student debt. And my first job out of college was working in economics consulting to help pay down those debts. And then I went into the Peace Corps, where I was a small business development volunteer. I helped found a micro lending program in rural Panama. I was an AmeriCorps Vista volunteer in Nashville, Tennessee, working on economic and educational empowerment in Nashville's largest public housing project for young people. And then I got hired by the National ACLU as a national field organizer and came home to Maine to run the ACLU of Maine in 2005. So that's just a little bit about my background. Now, I first got connected with Seth around power and affordability when I was a state senator. So I served as a leader at the ACLU of Maine for 8.5 years. I ran against Susan Collins in 2014. I did not win. The Supreme Court would be a lot different, and so would these issues of affordability, as well as core issues like Roe v. Wade, if I had won. But 2 years later, I decided to run for the state Senate when my Republican state senator retired. So, like Seth, I was running in a conservative district. I won a competitive primary, and I won a general in which the Republican nominee was a retired Navy Rear Admiral who had been born in the district, and the independent had been both a Democrat and a Republican previously. I won in a year that Donald Trump won that district. But when I knocked on 10,075 doors, the issues I heard then are the issues that I'm hearing now. People were furious about rising energy costs, about the cost of heating their homes, the cost of electricity. They were concerned about property taxes. They were concerned about making Maine a place where startups and small businesses could grow and develop. They were concerned about jobs for their kids' future that would keep them in Maine. They were concerned about access to healthcare and investment in public education. So I was reelected twice, even though the 11 towns in my district voted for Trump in 2024, by fighting on those economic issues that really bring people together regardless of ideology. And when I was knocking on doors in Pittston, Maine, I met a family living in a mobile home near power lines who had a really heartbreaking story about their failure to get CMP to pay attention to some of the challenges that they were having. And then Seth invited all of us to go testify before the PUC on an early rate case and to raise concerns about the lack of accountability and the exploitation of low-income people in our state. So I was proud to stand with my constituents from some of my most conservative communities to fill one of those early hearings and to testify. And I will be proud to testify with you in the future and as your next governor to stand with you in demanding accountability, quality of service, and lower costs for the consumers. Because I think it is absolutely wrong that foreign owned power companies are making insane double digit profits off of the backs of ratepayers here in Maine when we have some of the highest electricity costs in the nation. And in fact, a Portland Press Herald article yesterday indicated that the cost burden for low income Mainers is perhaps the highest in the nation, given the overall burden. So, my economic New Deal for Maine calls for a cap of 6% on the profits earned by these foreign owned power companies. I also believe that we really need to hold them accountable for service, for connection mandates, for service to our customers. I believe that we need to go big on clean energy. I think that we need to replace the connection agreements with simpler notification requirements to eliminate the stranglehold that utilities have on solar connections. My plan calls for direct investment in solar panels and heat pumps for LIHEAP eligible property owners, where rebates and tax credits aren't doing enough to help people on the bottom. And I think Maine residents and communities should have a greater say over the electricity projects and policies that affect them. Because while local control has always been a hallmark of the Maine way of life, it's become an excuse to abdicate responsibility for growing statewide problems. Someone suggested to me yesterday that the PUC has become the Susan Collins of electricity rates, that they're always very concerned, but when the rubber meets the road, they're always approving increases and really not taking full responsibilities for holding the utilities accountable. I think we need to make sure that all Maine residents, including our rural and low income communities, have access to reliable, affordable electricity. I think it is really important that we improve regulatory capacity. I think that we need to ensure that we have funding and staffing capacity to support the Office of the Public Advocate. And I think we need to curb monopoly profits. So I'm going to stop there. I'm happy to take your questions. I was really pleased to fill out the Our Power questionnaire to talk about the issue, to hear from you the background on the issues that you feel strongly about. I will just say, if I had been governor in 2021, I would not have vetoed 1708. I would have supported Pine Tree Power. I think utilities are a public good, and we need to eliminate monopoly power. We need to return to the concept of a public good and make sure that the investments that we're making are benefiting folks in our state. I also think we need to streamline permitting and procurement for clean energy projects in our state. That's something I heard from the Maine Association of Renewable Energy. And I have a lot of concerns, and I would have supported a moratorium on data centers. And as governor, I'm going to move forward with a moratorium on data centers so we can put in safeguards to safeguard our water and our energy and our environment. So with that, I'll stop, and I'm happy to talk more about energy policy. Happy to hear your thoughts. One of the things that I will say is that in my experience as an organizer, no one person has all the answers, and I would never trust someone that says that they do. I think the answers lie in the experts and the advocates who are grounded in our communities, who have decades of experience working on energy policy, working on affordability. That's where I think that we find the answers. At the very beginning of my campaign, I reached out to Bill McKibben, who wrote Here Comes the Sun. I just read his book, and I wanted to talk about how we could truly go big on solar and other forms of clean energy in our state to confront climate change. I've talked to folks all across the state, from Seth to others, people who have served on the PUC, who have served as the public advocate, people who have been staff, and really tried to listen as closely as possible because I think the solutions lie with the activists and the experts who've been doing this work for a long time. So, what I promise to you, above all, is that I will always have an open door, that I will listen to the impacted communities, that I will bring people together, and that I will ensure representation, not just from industry, definitely not from the lobby, but from the people who have the knowledge and the commitment to an equitable future and a clean energy future for all. So I'll stop there and I'm happy to take questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jenna. Great intro. And for folks who are have a question or thinking about a question, gestating one, just going to put in the chat as well. You can raise your hand and I'll call on you. David Gibson has already done so, so he'll be first. You can also put it in the Q&A, which is down at the bottom. There's a little link for Q&A, and you might have to click on the three dots and say more for that. And you can also put them in the chat. I will get to as many of you as possible, cycling through so that everyone gets at least one question answered, hopefully. And David, I'm going to start with you. Please, just to start us off, introduce yourself and let us know what your question is. Just give me one moment because I'm having
While you wait for
a little bit
David,
of a...
I'll just say Barbara
Yeah,
had a really wonderful comment in the chat. Safeguarding people is as important as the environment, energy, and water. Thank you for that. As head of the ACLU of Maine, I've been deeply committed now for over 2 decades to defending democracy and the rights of the people to make their own decisions about what impacts them. And I think, given my background growing up as I did, working class, I'll always fight for equity and justice for all, including everyday people who are struggling in our communities right now.
fantastic. David, I'm going to try to get to you, but I'm having a little trouble with that function. So let me pose Bill Dunn's question. And I'll just quickly, Bill is one of our board members at Our Power. He has a long career, now retired, but a long career of doing industry consulting for utilities and for regulators, running I believe it was the New England Power Pool. He'll correct me later, but it was one of the important functions in the New England transmission function headquarters, nerve center. And his question is about our PUC. You know, coming from that background, he appreciates your recognitions that the PUC is not doing its job. In fact, he would say the PUC has totally failed Maine ratepayers. Year after year, says Bill, Maine continues to have the worst or near worst reliability in the country and the worst customer satisfaction. You also mentioned yesterday's important news that the energy burden on lower income people is the highest in the nation. What would you do, Shenna, to force the PUC to do their job or redefine their job and serve Maine ratepayers and not the foreign owners of CMP and Versant?
So I think that I think this area, so a couple of things. One, I think it points to the fact that appointments matter. Who you place in positions of power on the PUC and as the public advocate is really deeply important. And I will also say that adequate staffing to really ensure that we have quality staff analyses of the proposals behind us is really important. And then third, I think this is an area where I think both the governor and the legislature should step up in terms of passing some guardrails and some mandates in terms of how the PUC operates, because I really do think that there's some serious concerns that affordability has simply not been adequately addressed, and that the power of the foreign-owned power companies exceeds the power of the people. And that's something that I think is unfortunately longstanding. And I think part of it is an inertia that we see oftentimes in our state institutions. For a long time, we've been doing things the way they have always been done. And that is clearly not working. So I actually think that there needs to be some pretty pretty radical reform. And I would welcome the partnership with advocates in our power to look at how we do that and how we enforce that. But what I will say is, as Secretary of State, I've stood up to Donald Trump. I have never backed down in standing up for the people of Maine. I also have a record of taking on tough fights when I was head of the ACLU of Maine. And so I'm not afraid to challenge the status quo. I've been doing it my whole life and using the power of the executive branch to do hard things. And again, I think partnering with consumer advocates on those reforms.
Great. Uh, uh, Good news. I did figure out how to allow people to talk. So do raise your hand if you want to be one of those folks. David, if you could introduce yourself and state your question.
Yeah, thank you, Shenna. It's great to hear where you stand on energy policies. I am the director of energy at College of the Atlantic in Bar Harbor, where I've been leading our efforts to transition the campus off fossil fuels by 2030. And in the last 5 years, we've cut our fossil fuel consumption roughly in half. So we're making good progress on that. As you're aware, Bar Harbor is pretty far from everywhere else in the state. And so driving around Maine this winter, more than half the homes I saw had ice dams and many small businesses too. This means that heat is leaking through the attic to melt the snow off the roof, which refreezes when it gets over the eaves, often causing damage in addition to costing thousands for wasted heat. The Weatherization Assistance Program and Efficiency Maine programs combined have insulated fewer than 4,000 homes per year, meaning it will take more than 100 years to seal and insulate all the homes and small businesses that need it. What will you do to accelerate insulation efforts? And as governor, would you consider training and mobilizing the National Guard to insulate low-income homes, treating this as the true emergency that it is for many families?
I love that idea. And first, I love that idea. That's an excellent idea. And I particularly love it because it will save the state money in the long run. So not only will it reduce fossil fuel emissions and reduce our dependency on fossil fuels and help save the climate, but imagine the dollars that will be saved by those low-income homeowners. As well as the lie heap dollars that will be saved, because we quite literally burn up billions of dollars in heating oil every single year. So I think that's a fabulous idea. I got to say, I love COA. I drive an electric vehicle. My husband's vehicle is a hybrid plug-in. And so every time we're in Bar Harbor, we take advantage of the chargers at COA because it's an easy walk to the downtown. And it's just such a beautiful campus. I've spoken on campus about democracy issues and voting rights issues in the past. So thank you for the work that you're doing. But that is really crucial, weatherization and rehabilitating existing housing stock, right? We have a housing crisis too. And one of my proposals is to create a statewide housing core, a Maine housing core, where we can take folks in, people maybe like my dad who didn't have prior carpentry experience until his first carpentry job and a few years later started out on his own. I think we should bring folks in, put them to work as carpenters, electricians, plumbers, weatherizers, pay them for 2 years, give them skills, but rehabilitate some of the vacant housing stock that is all across our state and every community and get it back into the market as weatherized, safe, affordable housing so that we can take advantage of some of the housing stock that we have to help solve the housing crisis. There are other details of my housing plan on my website. I also think we should be thinking about community-based housing for seniors. If you're a wealthy or upper middle class senior, you can probably find a place to live in your retirement here in our state. But if you're working class or you're poor, you're probably going to be staying in that drafty old farmhouse or ranch house or mobile home. And if we had community-based, affordable senior housing, that would free up some of that housing stock for young families. I also think there's some really exciting work happening around social housing, the idea of communal cooperative housing for young people who've graduated from college, not unlike dormitory housing, which would be more affordable, more energy efficient, and also help keep young people in our state. So your question has touched on a lot of things I'm very passionate about, and I want to thank you. And I think this is exactly the type of listening that I want to do as governor. Hear the best ideas and then make it happen.
Fantastic. Shenna, I'll read a couple of comments and questions real quick. And again, folks, do raise your hand if you are willing to come online like David and pose your question. It's much more interesting hearing it in your words than in mine. So Ken Colburn, who also hails from the Mount Desert area, is a former New Hampshire regulator, DEP air quality, I believe, and very much involved in co-op work, electricity co-ops, and he's on the board of Efficiency Maine Trust. Ken gives you kudos for streamlining, the talk about streamlining solar interconnection, especially for residential sites, and observes that there's a canard that utilities and even the Office of Public Advocate push that NEB, net energy billing, hurts lower income people. Ken says in reality it helps by reducing power costs, which are highly elastic. Large solar farms may be different, but residential solar should be promoted, not constrained. Any response to that?
Yeah, I mean, when I talked to Bill McKibben and I asked him about what states are doing it well, and he pointed to Texas that mandates connections to solar projects, and to Utah that had legalized plug-in solar. Now, the legislature just took a big step forward in legalizing plug-in solar, which will really work for renters. But again, I really think that this is really important. Now, I will say I would like to see general fund support for some of the work that we're doing to promote clean energy. I think we need to make sure that our investments are not funded purely on the backs of ratepayers. So I think as we think about how we structure incentives and investments in clean energy moving forward, I'd like to think about how we utilize the general fund dollars as well.
Great. Becky Bartovix asks the following question, and Becky is a wonderful sheep farmer from North Haven and very much involved in Sierra Club and a longtime friend of our power. I'm sure you know her. Becky asks, thank you for taking this time. What can you say about the upcoming private equity push to invest in small scale nuclear without any protections from the waste, about as far as waste goes, or costs to ratepayers?
I oppose nuclear. We haven't figured out a way to manage nuclear waste in a sustainable way. And I am deeply concerned about private equity promoting nuclear in the same way that private equity has really ruined the housing market and in many parts of the country is ruining healthcare. I think there need to be guardrails restricting private equity from buying up our mobile homes, buying up our homes, and certainly from doing small scale nuclear projects.
Great. Matt Kennedy, who is involved in the Maine Community Power Cooperative, a wonderful cooperative I encourage folks to check out. You can learn more about them at our website, in fact. Matt asks if there are more specifics you could offer around permitting reform for renewable energy projects. I think you mentioned permitting reform. He agrees it needs to happen and mentions that other northeastern states have passed reforms of their own. Any other details on that you could share?
So one of the biggest challenges of streamlining permitting is just a management issue. And what I mean by that is I was talking to one clean energy project investor. He's been waiting 4 years for a decision from the Department of Environmental Protection. He said, I'm not looking for any changes to the laws or the rules. I just need answers because when you have to wait years to get an answer, then the cost of the project itself accelerate. And without dependability and reliability, without predictability of how long a permitting process is going to take and when you're going to get an answer, that really becomes a barrier to investment. And quite frankly, the solar energy investors and the other clean energy investors will go elsewhere. And so I'm not sure if it's the laws that are the problem as much as management and staffing. So when I took over at the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, we had a backlog of vehicle titles of over 75,000 titles. On my first day in office, Adam Lee, who's a big proponent of electric vehicles, he runs Lee Automalls, called me and said, "Congratulations, Secretary Bellows, on getting sworn into office today. You need to fix titles." And I was like, "Oh, tell me more." And he said, the backlog is making it so we can't get clean titles for the vehicles we're trying to sell. So we can't move vehicles off our lot. The backlog is really harming our business. So I went on a listening tour. I delved into the department. I heard from employees what some of the challenges were. We made a management change. We created some processing changes. We had eliminated the backlog within 6 months by the summer, not by changing any laws or policies, not even by hiring new people, but simply by changing, making a management change, and then also streamlining our processes. So we then also implemented an electronic lien and titling solution so that the lenders could exchange titles electronically because previously everything was paper-based and our team was literally trying to call warehouses that TD Bank North had in the South to try to get paper titles mailed to us so we could mail them to the car dealers. So we eliminated that and modernized our process. So I think that it's less of a question about what rules in Maine law are a barrier to development. Although if there are any barriers that people want to discuss, I'm willing to have that conversation. It's more of a question of emphasis and staffing at the DEP to ensure that people get decisions in a timely way and that there's an expectation of when they're going to get a decision. So that as they're building out a project plan, they know that they'll have a decision within 3 months or 6 months of submitting an application to the state so that then they can plan when they'll be able to take those next steps to make the project a reality. So that's what I mean when I say streamlining permitting. I think this is where my executive management experience running not only elections, which is a high stakes, high security endeavor, but also the BMV, which is, bureaucracy at its best and its worst. I've modernized the BMV. And if I can modernize the BMV, I can modernize anything.
Okay. I'm going to ask John Ehrman, Eliza Donahue, and Vaughn Woodruff to raise their hands if they're willing to ask their question in their own words, which would be fabulous. And I think I see a victim. Thank you, Eliza. Could you introduce yourself and state your question?
Yeah, happy to. Thanks, Seth, and thanks so much, Shenna. It's Eliza Donahue with the Maine Renewable Energy Association. First, I really appreciated your answer regarding permitting reform. It's absolutely consistent with conversations you and I have had in the past. Also, when you and I have talked in the past, you've talked about your experience as Secretary of State in running procurements. And as you know, and so many people in the room know today, that procurements are really critical to Maine's clean energy transition. And I'd love for you to speak a little bit more to your experience in that space and particularly maybe examples of where you've been nimble in managing procurements.
Thank you for that question, Eliza. And I recognize that procurement at the Bureau of Motor Vehicles and in elections and corporations is different than energy procurement. But this is actually a passion of mine and one of the reasons that I'm running. The state has some very antiquated processes across state government, whether it's procurement or rulemaking or even our budgeting process. But procurement is one of the worst. It rewards incentives. It is a cumbersome, lengthy process that rewards big businesses over startups or smaller enterprises that is often wasteful and often doesn't include accountability. So, by analogy, I'll give you an example from Health and Human Services. We are currently wasting millions of dollars on an out-of-state company for non-emergency transportation, and there's no accountability. They don't show up. Seniors, people with disabilities miss an appointment Maybe they miss 3 medical appointments and then they lose their provider. And the state continues to renew the contract because we will reward the biggest bidders. And we don't hold the bidders accountable for some of their promises. So at the Secretary of State's office, I've gotten really involved in a hands-on way with our procurement processes. We have recognized that we've implemented technology transformations. We built a new central voter registration data base to keep everyone's voter data safe. By the way, I'm not giving that up to the Trump administration. We implemented online appointments. We connected the BMV license and ID system to 50 other states. And in our procurement processes, we have worked hard to make sure that we are getting what we demand in terms of customization, in terms of an understanding of Maine laws and Maine communities, and not necessarily rewarding the biggest bidder because the biggest bidder is not always the best bidder. And then also holding people accountable and firing a vendor if it's not working out, or firing making, ending contracts if the deliverables are not being met. And that's not an easy thing to do. You need gumption and guts to say, this isn't working. You haven't met the deliverables. We're ending this. But I think it's really important. And I do think this is an area that I want to reform. And I do think we're going to probably need some legal reform. So I'm interested in working with you, Eliza, and others to change the statute and to change the rules around procurement to make it more nimble, more efficient, faster, and also reward Maine-based companies and create incentives for the innovators, the creators, the smaller organizations that have good ideas and will actually deliver what they promise.
Great. Next up, we have Vaughn Woodruff. And I'm going to ask Vaughn that you introduce yourself, unmute, and say your question.
Hey, Shenna, Vaughn Woodruff here. I don't think
Hi,
we've
Vaughn.
ever talked politics before, so it's exciting. You're joining me for a walk in lovely Pittsfield. First off, we haven't chatted in a while, and I want to say I appreciate your public service. I'm sure when you signed up, you never signed up to be doxxed, and what you and Brandon went through during that whole altercation, I imagine was a lot, and thank you for your willingness to keep on. My question goes back to the PUC, and it's a very procedural organization, right? They're called deliberations when they go through the process of making rulings, etc. And that process creates a lot of institutional momentum that's very difficult. For instance, last year, the Passamaquoddy tribe went through about a 12-month process, excessive legal fees to get their rights that are afforded them under our net energy billing rules, which I think highlights something that has gone on there a lot for individual customers, but that also impacts citizens broadly, right? It takes a lot of resources to participate at the commission. What do you see as structural approaches to solve that? How do we make sure, this isn't just the commission, this is a lot of our institutions that are set up to serve a specific class of people, and it often doesn't serve us all. What do you see as some potentials for addressing those structural impediments?
So with that first example, we need tribal sovereignty. That never should have been allowed to happen. Passamaquoddy tribe wanted to install solar panels on their residents' homes and reap the benefit of lower electricity costs through net energy billing. And for them to be challenged, I think is partly a function of lack of tribal sovereignty. So I have said as governor, I'm going to introduce tribal sovereignty on day one. We are going to get it passed. And I'm really proud to have been endorsed by the Holton Band of Maliseet and Chief Clarissa Sabatis, because I think that's a really crucial thing to do. Two, I think this is where representation and leadership matters, right? We should have Wabanaki leaders in state government in positions of power, in environmental protection and energy and economic development. We should have members of your community, folks who are experts on solar, folks who are consumer advocates represented in the highest levels of government, because part of how the rules get written, how the laws get shaped, depends on who's in those rooms drafting those rules and writing those laws, as Seth well knows. And so, in terms of changing reforming the system, I think it's going to take a fresh approach in terms of leadership that doesn't reward the highest paid lobbyists or the biggest corporations in our state, but instead is really representing the people. And that sounds like a facile answer, but I think it is extraordinarily crucial who the governor appoints to departments, to commissions, to boards all across the state. That has perhaps more influence over the future and the direction of our state and how we're able to make these reforms than any single law that could be passed. So Vaughn, I was really pleased to get to work with you. Gosh, that was back when I was hired by the Sierra Club, and Becky Bartovics was a friend and ally, and we were advocating for net energy billing. We were advocating for passenger rail. We were advocating for environmental protections. So it's fun to be in a virtual room with you, and I can't wait until I win the primary to sit down and talk a little bit more about your ideas. Oh, I just lost the sound from you, Seth.
Thank you. I think we have time for 2 or 3 more questions, and then we have some concluding remarks from Shenna, and we'll wrap it up. I hope folks are planning to stay on for the next power lunch, which begins promptly at 1, the separate registration. But I'll ask that you keep these questions very brief. Just introduce yourself and state your question. I'm going to begin with John Aramond, who has a question about elections. I take it this is utility and energy related. We're going to keep it, kind of in that sphere, but it's about elections and money. John.
Well, thank you, Seth, and thank you, Shenna, for joining us here today. First, I want to applaud you and your track record of persistence in tackling major challenges. And are you afraid to tackle the ones that look almost insurmountable? My question, yes, it's about campaign finance reform. Unlimited PAC spending, is pouring in to influence statewide elections in Maine. What might a governor be able to do about it, and what would you do as governor to curb the influence of unlimited PAC spending?
I hate dark money in politics. I think Citizens United has ruined campaigns. I am the only candidate in this race who either is not self-funding with hundreds of thousands of dollars or taking money from an out-of-state dark money PAC. And we're seeing it even in the Democratic governor's race right now. Super PACs are, slinging barbs at each other on behalf of some of my competitors. And I just absolutely think that is wrong. And I've run my campaign the way I will govern as governor of, for, and by the people. I am not taking any corporate PAC money. I don't have any shadowy billionaires funding an out-of-state independent expenditure on my behalf because I've rejected that. My campaign is, I've raised $1.8 million, which is insane, given that I grew up as the daughter of a carpenter and a greenhouse worker in Hancock, Maine, and married an educator from Skowhegan. But 75% of what I've raised has been from Maine. I've made over 30,000 phone calls to Mainers asking for their votes and their donations. And in 2026, over 60% of my donations were $50 or less. So we are truly funded of, for, and by the people. So in terms of what we do about it, quite frankly, I supported the referendum to ban foreign spending in our elections. I've supported a number of clean elections initiatives that the courts unfortunately have ruled as unconstitutional. I say we keep trying. Hawaii's just signed into law something really interesting to think about the way we redefine corporations. And I think that explore it, and of course, folks are saying, well, this isn't constitutional. Well, as former head of the ACLU of Maine, we were successful in doing a lot of things that people said couldn't be done or questioned, just to expand the rights and the power of people and the most vulnerable. And as Secretary of State, when a lot of lawyers and and experts said, oh, you have to turn over the data, the voter data to the federal government because of X, Y, and Z laws. And I was one of the first to say, no, go jump in the Gulf of Maine. And we just won our case. A Trump appointed judge just found that I was well within my authority to protect Mainers' voter data. So, yes, these challenges, clean energy, affordability, healthcare for all, universal childcare, they may sound impossible or intractable, but we have to have the courage to try. We have to have the courage to say no. And, as Vaughn mentioned, I've been doxxed, I've been swatted. My husband, Brandon, and I had to go live in a safe house after I ruled that Trump was ineligible for the ballot. But, every day I drove to the office to do my job because I won't back down to bullies. And so, if the Trump administration doesn't scare me, the foreign-owned utilities aren't going to scare me, and the shadowy billionaires from out of state aren't going to scare me. I think we need to make progress on clean energy, on campaign finance, and really on a better life for the people of Maine.
Okay, we're going to try to do a lightning round on the last remaining questions and wrap by 12:55. So let me go to Peter Fitzgerald next. Peter, if you could just briefly introduce yourself and state your question. Where'd you go, Peter? There you are.
Thank you.
Peter, you're on.
Peter Fitzgerald. I'm an electrical engineer. I do grid planning. I'm with Alt Engineering LLC. Would you support improved whistleblower protections, similar to what the SEC has?
Yes, 100%. This was a really great part of the Our Power questionnaire, and in that Our Power really laid out some of the need for increased and improved whistleblower protections. When I was head of the ACLU, we did a lot of work to defend whistleblowers in a lot of ways, and I think what I understand from Our Power is that existing Maine protections for utility whistleblowers provide some partial protections from retribution, but no compensation. And I think that we need to make sure that we are protecting the general public and protecting whistleblowers. So yes.
Great model that the SEC implemented after the crash of 2007. And that's the basis for the Maine law. It would be first in the nation. It came very close in the previous legislature, I think just a handful of votes in the House. So we're hopeful that with a governor like you, we can get that through. I'm going to ask a question that we've come up in the previous power lunches. Senator Karhowski put it in the chat, or in the Q&A rather. What qualities or qualifications are you considering for your appointment to the DOER Commissioner, Department of Energy Resources? As a cabinet level position, as you know, so very important appointment. And what are you looking for in that person?
So I'm looking for someone with deep experience in consumer rights, because when the AARP says that electricity rates are their number one issue, because their members have said that that's the biggest issue facing them, then we know we have an affordability crisis when it comes to energy. I also think knowledge and expertise and experience in the clean energy space, because if we're truly going to transform Maine's economy, and we have so much potential, we are so well situated to be a strong clean energy producer and to increase the clean energy supply, to bring down rates and to take some of those benefits from that clean energy production and keep it for Maine residents. So I think experience in the clean energy sector, and also courage. I want someone who is unafraid to challenge the status quo. I want that in all of my commissioners. And I think the final piece is I am looking for someone who can build coalitions across party lines. Like when I think about my deputies who run the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, Maine State Archives, and corporations, elections, and commissions, one of the things that Republicans in the state house will say, even though they were not happy with my decision to rule Trump ineligible for the ballot because January 6th was an insurrection, they will also say that I'm one of the best departments to work with because I make sure that all of my leadership team knows that we're here to work with anyone around shared principles to modernize services, improve customer service, and make life better for the people of Maine. And so I think those are some of the attributes that I've been thinking about with regards to the Department of Energy. I think it's exciting that that's a new cabinet level position. I think the absence of that has been reflected in the absence of leadership in our state. And so, but I really do think that it's important to recruit someone who's unafraid to challenge the status quo, who will work with anyone to get things done, and who has deep roots representing impacted communities and advocating for consumers and affordability, as well as expertise in clean energy development.
Okay. I think we'll squeeze in one more question and then give you a chance to give us a final parting word of wisdom or two, and a final statement. Maine PERS, the Maine Public Employee Retirement System, has more than $1.2 billion invested in fossil fuels, largely through unaccountable private equity funds. Will you push Maine PERS to follow the law, LD 99 passed in 2021, and fully divest from fossil fuels, ideally reinvesting those funds in efficiency and clean energy projects in Maine?
Yes. Full stop.
That was easy.
And I think this is really important, and it's the law, right? And I think it's really important when I train clerks around the state, and I'm not involved in the day-to-day operations of elections this year. There's a wall of separation. You won't see me at the counts or the ranked choice voting tabulation next week. But when we train the clerks, we always tell the clerks all across the state, you have to follow the laws. And we say to the clerks, even the stupid ones. Now, there are no stupid election laws. We've got really great election laws in Maine. But what our point is, it doesn't matter whether the people holding the office or holding the power of a particular position agree with the law or not. When the legislature passes a law, it is the responsibility of the governor to implement it fully and to hold their teams accountable for implementation. And I think that understanding of the difference between the legislature and the executive branch, as Secretary of State, I run elections, and I'm really proud of the work that we've done to increase voter participation. And it's high stakes, it's high security. We've done a great job. I've also run the BMV, and we've modernized a lot of those services. And I run corporations in Maine State Archives. But I always, I didn't agree with Real ID. Seth and I worked on trying to stop Real ID way back in the day. But it's the law, and so I implement it. And so again, I agree with the Maine PERS law that the legislature passed in 2021. Just want to make that clear and get that out there. But I also think it's important that the governor hold the entire executive branch accountable for following the laws that are passed.
Shanna,
so I
thank you
would
so
love to
much.
share my
Really
website.
Yeah.
So,
Give it 1 minute. Give us your final thoughts.
So I was proud to be part of the team that got ranked choice voting passed. You are welcome. So in whichever primary you vote in, you can vote for all of the candidates. If you're voting in the Democratic primary, and you can do that if you're unenrolled, again, that's something that I supported when I was secretary. If you're voting in the Democratic primary, I would like you to rank me number one. If for any reason I'm not your number one, I want to be your number two. And if you really are passionate about what you heard, again, there's hundreds of thousands of dollars are poured in this week from out of state shadowy billionaires to flood the airwaves with ads, some of which are not entirely accurate. I am not doing that. We are running a grassroots campaign, but I did make a decision yesterday to launch a third and final ad about my positive vision for the state. That was taking a big risk. We emptied the bank account to send it over to the television stations today. And so we're trying to raise $42,000 in the next 5 days to cover our staffing costs and finish up this campaign. So if you liked what you heard today, A, vote for me. But B, go to bellowsformaine.com, bellowsformaine.com. And if you make a contribution of $50 or less, you'll be like the 60+% of Mainers who contributed to my campaign this year. Or you can make a contribution of a little bit more and help us power through so that we can partner with our power, with the clean energy sector, with consumers to make Maine the most affordable state in the nation for clean energy and to make progress on our climate change goals to preserve Maine for the next generation and 7 generations thereafter. Thank you.
Thank you, Shenna. It's really been wonderful having you here. It's amazing how quickly an hour goes, and really great to catch up, and good luck in the next few days. Maybe we'll see you Tuesday night. I know, I did extend the invitation if you're able. I know you're busy that day, a little election going on, but for everyone that's listening, just a reminder, the South Portland Community Center is hosting the first of 2 public witness hearings in CMP's latest rate case. Yet again, they're asking for more money, and we need to show up and talk to the PUC and talk to the media. This is the big opportunity to do that, and it's at 5 p.m. at the South Portland Community Center on Tuesday, the same day that we will be ranking candidates in the Democratic and Republican primaries. At 1 o'clock today, just in a few minutes, and I put it in the chat, the Nirav Shah Power Lunch is coming up. That is just a 30-minute one, so do log in a few minutes if you can join us for that. We'd love to have you. And the Our Power Maine website is a great place to go to see the full survey results. Make sure you click through all the tabs at the bottom. Shenna's answers to our survey, all of the candidates who did answer, not all of them did. But go find out who did. Go find out who answered and how they answered, and click through all the tabs and see where they stand on campaign finance reform, see where they stand on data centers, on utility profits. OurPowerMaine.org is the place for all that. Thank you, everyone, again, for joining us today for this 3rd Power Lunch. We got the 4th one coming up in just a few minutes. So, and thank you, most of all, Shenna, once again, for joining us. Take care.